for letting me do
Yeah.
that.
Well, I'm not sure if I should be embarrassed or excited or what, but that was a great introduction. Thank you, Mark. I am at the Art Museum in Beaumont. I've been there 2 years this coming October. So it's been a great position so far, and I'm really enjoying my time there. And it's wonderful to come back to CASETA. I have in the past been here on the other side exhibiting with Bill's Gallery in the art fair and really had a great time doing that. There was a lot of sweat involved unloading art all of the time, so we kept pretty busy, but it was a great introduction. And I will add to Bill, with both Bill and Katie Edwards actually, they really instilled a great foundation of looking at Texas artists and that passion and interest. So that was really pivotal to what I'm doing now and hopefully will continue to do in the future. So I was asked to put together a presentation, and I thought, well, why don't I look at Southeast Texas artists, which is what I'm dealing with pretty much every day right now with my job. I am actually from the Southeast Texas area. My parents live in Orange, Texas. I went to high school in Port Arthur and Orange, and I'll show a map in a second and kind of get y'all oriented. So I grew up in the area and then left for school and come back. I live in Houston and commute to Beaumont for work. I'll stay with my parents occasionally too. They really like it when I come stay. They have a very comfortable bed, so I enjoy that too. But it's been really great to focus at a regional museum that does put an importance on showing artists from the area. We will exhibit contemporary artists, so artists working all over Texas, but then also artists that have a history at the museum and in Beaumont. So just for an example, our show in September is featuring an artist, Ann Wood, who's a contemporary artist out of Galveston. She's doing a big installation that's kind of taking over the space, making this fantastical kind of forest-like canopy. And then in the spring, we're gonna host the Jose Arpa show. So we really try to keep a good variety of different media, but also different artists from different periods, but always bringing it back to Texas. And I do think that's a really important thing to do is, understand and know where you came from, especially when dealing with the arts. So just to kind of make sure we all know the area we're talking about, Texas is super big. So the Golden Triangle, which, can y'all hear me okay? Is that everything good? Okay. The Golden Triangle is this area right in here, way down at the southeast tip. That's important to remember because we are really close to lots of different kind of other state boundaries. We have Louisiana right over here. We have Houston, which has always been a really big force in the art world. We've got Dallas, not too far away. I mean, you can go up there in a day and spend time. So there's a lot of influences coming in from other areas. I just like this postcard because it really gives you an idea of how beautiful our landscape is with all the industry. And I will say this, you might knock the industry, but on that drive between Houston and Beaumont, I see the most beautiful sunrises and sunsets. They are just gorgeous. It is stunning. And I frequently think of our artists, especially artists like Richard Stout, that have focused on the landscape of the area and how gorgeous that is. And then here is just that kind of golden area. That's why it's called the Golden Triangle. You have Beaumont right here, which is where the museum is, Port Arthur right down here, and then Orange, which is closest to the state line. If you take I-10 towards New Orleans, you drive right through all of that. It makes a triangle, and then some people say the golden comes from the fumes from the refineries that, when you look above, so we'll claim that too. And going back to the industry of the area, because this does play a part in what I'll talk about today, there were a lot of burgeoning opportunities for jobs in the 1900s, early 1900s. So I included these images. We have a painting on the left by Richard Stout right here from 1950, Twin Derricks. The top right up here by Katherine Greene Baker, showing the timber and lumber industry, also some leisure too. They're kicking back and relaxing. And then the bottom right, Dr. Robert Rogan with a port scene from Beaumont, because those are really the dominant sources of industry where the money and jobs came from. So in 1901, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Spindletop. So when you come to Orange and Beaumont to visit, you can go visit the Spindletop Museum. And the oil industry really boomed, brought in a lot of people to work there. Katherine Greene Baker actually came from a rather affluent family that was in the timber and lumber industry. So that was also a dominant source. In fact, in Silsbee, my mom used to work in Silsbee. But let me go back to this slide real quick. I'm going to reference some cities that are all in this triangle. So it's not just Beaumont, Port Arthur, Orange, Silsbee, Nederland, all these other areas are kind of all in that region, about a 20, 30, 40-minute distance from each other. So in Silsbee, there's actually still some lumber and paper mills, and they make paper over there, and the smell of that, if you have ever smelled a paper mill, you'll never forget that. So I could always tell we were getting close to my mom's work. And then down here, the port scene, especially around the World Wars, the port industry was really big. So that being said, we had a lot of people moving to the area, and there was money. And typically when you have money, you end up with some people looking for what can they do with this money, and what will they use it on. So they traveled, they relaxed, they enjoyed themselves. I included this painting by Katherine Greenbaker showing some of those leisure activities. We also had a lot of women coming up in the arts. It does sometimes end up being the women that do things, and I like to think it's because the men know we're the ones that get it done. But they really kind of end up taking control. And in the early, I'm so glad that Judy talked about the initial women's clubs in the state, because Beaumont had a women's club in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s that was pretty active. They exhibited local artists, they invited jurors to come in. Chilman came in from the MFA and juror to show in 1938, I think. And they were pretty active, and actually there is record in the 30s of them having a permanent collection of about 24 objects. So they were already putting this emphasis on collecting early on. And then there was also associations like the Port Arthur Art Association. Ola McNeil Davidson came in for that, Corinne Mary Spellman. So we were bringing in artists from all over that I know this group is familiar with to speak and to teach at these areas in the Golden Triangle. Lamar is a big part of that as well. Lamar, what we know now is Lamar University, but began as South Park College in the early 1920s. Then it transitioned to Lamar College, I believe, then Lamar Tech College. So if you're looking through newspaper clippings like we all like to do, in the 1950s, 60s, it's referenced as Lamar Tech. That's how you're gonna see it in all the ads and everything. But Lamar, and I kind of went down a rabbit hole this week. I tend to do that. I kind of focus in on something and get sidetracked. But Lamar has a really interesting history at the foundation of their art department. I started calling around, called David Cargill, an artist in the area, and Robert Rogan, asking them, because they both were around at Lamar, and trying to figure out, when did it start? When was there an art department? Well, that was definitely not an easy answer, because actually as early as 1938, when it was still this Lamar College, there is evidence that they were offering art education classes for teachers that wanted to teach and then teach art. So really early on, there was an emphasis not only on giving art classes at a college level, but then how are we going to teach the youth coming up in the area? By early 1950s, 54 to be exact, there was a Bachelor of Science in commercial art, then also studio art. And that's kind of the period that we see artists like John Alexander, Lin Sweat coming out of commercial art degrees. That being said, I know sometimes commercial art, we start to think, oh, that's not the same as fine arts. Well, these were bona fide fine art, painting, drawing classes. That's what they were. It was just at the time we didn't have a full-on art department. They were umbrellaed under like home economics. So they were fine art, painting classes, but really just put under a different division at the time. By 72, when Lamar became Lamar University, we also had the BFAs established with studio art and fine art. All through that time, there was a huge emphasis on bringing in expert faculty, not just someone that could teach the classes, but people that knew what they were doing. One of those men is right down here, W.H. Boughton, the far right. He was a student of Grant Wood and came out of that Northwest area, came to Lamar and taught. He was head of the department for quite a while. And a lot of the artists from the period will reference him as a really influential person. And I included this image. If any of you have been on Lamar's campus, this is an old image, but this is still the art building. They have covered the top, so it's kind of an open pavilion when you walk in. But Lamar, and I talked to Donna Meeks quite a bit, who's head of their department right now. She was very helpful. She said that they kind of had this philosophical idea from day one of how they were going to look at Lamar's art department. You have the two buildings, which was commercial art and studio art. Eventually it was studio and fine art. So you have these two, or graphic design and then fine art. You have these two buildings, kind of this dichotomous relationship between the two. And then later they founded the art museum there. There's an art museum on Lamar's campus called the Dishman Art Museum. It was founded in 1983. And they saw that as another kind of part of this dichotomy that actually worked together in a sense. You had the creation side, and then you had the exhibition side with the gallery. So that has always been a focus of Lamar, and I think a really pivotal one. They'd had study abroad classes, everything was a really big deal. Around the same time that Lamar was really getting going, already had these classes, but in the 40s, 50s, really starting to bulk everything up. We had the foundation of the Beaumont Art League. And the Beaumont Art League is still in residence today. They still show local artists. They also have a permanent collection. In fact, I just finished helping kind of reviewing a grant they're working on to get better storage facilities for their permanent collection. So they're really making efforts to preserve what they have. Right up here is Will Amelia Stearns Price, who was one of the early founders of the Beaumont Art League, along with Gillian Hayes right here. And this is a painting actually that Will Amelia painted of Gillian Hayes. And I just thought that was a beautiful portrait to include and kind of tying those women together, both in the area, teaching the students coming up and founding the Art League. And then later on, by around 1950, some of those same people that founded the Art League, so we had this exhibition space, decided, okay, well, we've got this exhibition space for local artists. We now need a permanent space that's going to collect but also give art classes. And that led to the founding of BAM, the Beaumont Art Museum. And I really want to go back to BAM. I would love to be able to go around and say, I work for BAM, but it's just a great acronym. But the Beaumont Art Museum, founded in 1950, and it had numerous locations throughout Beaumont compared to where it is today. But started out, these group of women came together and said, we have to have a permanent exhibition space. Will Amelia Stearns Price was involved, and Wendy Hoffman. She was very influential. And Tam, correct me if I'm wrong, but was it Wendy whose husband was actually offered the job as first president and then he turned it down? I think I read it, he said, no, but my wife can do it. So I think he knew he probably wasn't up for the job. But she was the first president for 2 years at the Beaumont Art Museum, and Will Amelia taught figure drawing at the Art Museum. And actually, David Cargill really impressed on me this idea that the original Art Museum, sure, they were going to have exhibitions and a permanent collection, but they also really wanted to teach. That was integral to what they wanted to do. We have Lamar, but we also want to offer classes at the Art Museum. So that was a really big deal. And funny story about this painting. So we had an exhibition of Will Amelia Stearns Price, and I worked with Stan Price on it, her grandson, and it was a wonderful show, and that painting was in the show. Well, we're in Southeast Texas, pretty conservative area, so whenever we have a nude, we have to alert the local schools. In fact, I've shown nudes since then, and we had a teacher call saying there's all the nudes in the gallery, and I'm like, there's no nudes. I don't even really notice them anymore. But anyway, this painting was in there, so we had to let them know. Most of the schools were fine with it. It's a very academic, classical, figure study, and beautiful painting. So a fourth grade class is going through with our curator of education, Andy, and he decides, if you've got a nude, the first thing you do with those kids is go straight to the nude, because if you don't, you're gonna be in one room talking, and you're gonna have 5 kids, the other 20 are in the other room laughing. Okay, so you gotta go straight for the nude. So he goes right over this and says, okay, what are we looking at? And he says, well, this is a nude female, figure study. And one little kid, he said, well, why do you think the artist made this? Why do you think we need to do this? And one little kid in the back raised his hand, and he goes, to be nasty. We just have laughed about that forever. And of course, Annie explained, well, it was actually, figure study, really learning how the body works. Then he said, we call this nude figure drawing, figure painting. And another kid raised their hand. He was like, that's not what we call it in my house. And Andy was like, oh boy, where is this going? He's like, well, what do you call it? And he goes, well, we call it butt naked. So we have laughed about that, And I think Will Amelia would like that too, because that gets down to the essence of why the museum was founded and what we were about doing. So the Art Museum now, well, am I not moving? There, I'm moving. The Art Museum now is located downtown in this building. This is kind of the entrance, the porte cochere, and then we have the galleries, exhibition space, everything inside that building. This is an image from the ribbon cutting in 1987. So it was at that time that it changed from BAM to AMSET, the Art Museum of Southeast Texas. And the reason they changed the name is because they were growing, they wanted to grow their permanent collection, but most importantly, they wanted to grow their educational outreach. We were not just Beaumont, we were that entire Golden Triangle and Southeast Texas area. We actually have a mobile Art2Go program where Andy, our curator, drives all the way into Louisiana and goes and sees underserved schools. So even goes outside of Southeast Texas sometimes. So, and then we have some works that are just key works of the museum that people come to see. We have this outstanding James Searles sculpture that hangs from the foyer right here. And let's see, in the 80s, we had about 240 objects in the permanent collection. Now we have over 1,200. So we've really been aggressively in our acquisitions committee trying to bulk that up. And that's part of my job too, is to present works for acquisition. So let's get going now to some of the artists from the area. So running these great institutions were a lot of artists that were very influential to the period. Laureen David is one of them. She was actually born in Independence, Missouri, but moved to Beaumont in about 1931. Laureen was an amazing artist in her own right. However, if you talk to people that knew her from the time, like David Cargill, they say that they really had no idea she was an artist. He said he found her very attractive when he was young, but she never talked about her art career. She was just very quiet and soft-spoken, but she was an award-winning exhibiting artist all over the nation. But that being said, she was also crazy influential at the Beaumont Independent School District level. She came in and she taught first in art education in the Beaumont High School District, and then was asked to be head of the art department, and did that for numerous years until she retired. These are two early watercolors. Now, Laureen, you're probably saying these don't exactly look like Texas scenes. Laureen spent some time on the East Coast. She would go study. All of these artists were all over the place. Like we know in Texas, we were not isolated. We did go outside all of the time, studied internationally, met with other artists. So there's all sorts of influences you have to consider. She went to the East Coast, and these are from that time. She brought them back. She exhibited them quite a bit. This one actually on the right, Hillside View, was exhibited in New York in 1936. And then also she was asked to be part of the women's print, I forget the exact name. There was the Lone Star Printmakers, that was the men's guild in Dallas, but then there was the women's printmakers, Texas Printmakers, that was it, that was founded because the men wouldn't let them in, basically. And so Laureen was invited by Stella Lamont to come on board with them and exhibit with them. And she did very well there. This is a piece called The Cloisters, and then over here, Destination Unknown. And that piece actually, Destination Unknown, she submitted to the Dallas Print Society show in 1941 and received a $10 award where she beat out Jerry Bywaters, Blanche McVeigh, and Alexander Hogue. She beat them all for $10, so that would probably buy us a cup of coffee here. In fact, it wouldn't pay for a day of parking. We'd be able to park half a day. So anyway, but great artist, and really one to keep your eye out for. But really, how most people remember her is just for her influence in the teaching and education system. But as you can see, her art speaks for itself as well. Oh, come on. Katherine Greene Baker. I've already shown a few images by Katherine Greene Baker, definitely one to have on your radar. You probably can tell there's some Hogue influence there. She did study with Alexander Hogue. She came from an affluent family with money from the timber industry, East Texas family. She also spent some time in Paris. The piece on the left, 1936 Landscape, was actually part of the Texas Centennial exhibition. And then on the right, Untitled Railroad Tracks. I love this piece. There's a lot going on here. There's a comment on industry of the time, travel, but then also different ethnicities and different social classes. I just think it's a great kind of coming of age piece. And one thing Baker does so well is also moves into abstraction, and she does it quite skillfully. I mean, I think it's really great to see, and that's one thing you will notice, that these Southeast Texas artists are kind of all over the place in their styles. You can't just say, oh, well, this person was Impressionist, or this person just did abstract works. They are really experimenting. I think some of that is the proximity to Lamar University. If you've got a university, you're pulling in professors from other areas, you're up on the current trends. Modernism came in vogue at Lamar there. They were really emphasizing modern and abstract. Also, we had like Ola McDill Davidson coming in, so I really think that played a big part in that. Will Amelia Stearns Price here, born in Denison, Texas, spent some time in Oklahoma, also studied at the Art Students League in New York with Dmitry Romanovsky in New York, but came back and ended up in Beaumont. She spent a good portion of her life in Taos. In 1934, she traveled for the summer to Taos and met Walter Ufer, and there's some great stories there that Stan and I can share with you later. We don't have time here, but she was quite the spirit. I loved learning about her in that exhibition. But she came back to Beaumont and really brought a lot of Ufer's philosophy with her and worked there. She was with the Art League, founding in 1943, and the Art Museum. Here are some great pieces kind of emphasizing that port industry of the area. This is a piece probably done from her Beaumont period called The Collection. This is now in our permanent collection at the Art Museum. It's a stunning work. And once again, you see this versatility. I did not include any of her New Mexico inspired pieces because they're Texas. Well, we're Texas, that's New Mexico. But she also does these just amazing, both abstract and representational landscapes from the time. And you can see Ufer's emphasis on light in her work. Wayfie Hoffman, or Way Hoffman, she was the first president at the Beaumont Art Museum. I mentioned her earlier. Born in Clay City, Kentucky, but traveled throughout Europe, was aware of the French Impressionists, and I think that's what we see at play here quite a bit. You can see she's quite skilled with color. She spent some time in Port Arthur, which is about 20 miles away from Beaumont before they moved to Beaumont, was president for 2 years, and she had a solo show at the Art Museum in 1954, a few years after its inception. So very influential artist as well. And Gillian Hayes, and I included this portrait one more time just to remind you, we saw her back when we were talking about the founding of the Art League and the Art Museum too. But she, and Richard Stout can share fond memories of Gillian Hayes, was really a mentor as well to a lot of the up and coming artists in the period. But what I love here is look, I mean, you would really think these are two different artists. You've got this representational kind of, it's kind of getting to an abstract sense. You have that really nondescript background. The similarities are her use of light. I mean, you can just see this pulsing energy from the light emanating from behind the face and also coming out of this abstract work. Lillian was very skilled with that, taught once again Art League and Art Museum. And then we have this street mood from 1952, which is of the New Orleans French Quarter. And this piece actually was a first place winner at the Art Museum's first annual exhibition in 1952. So we were talking with the panel discussion, someone asked a question about the juried shows and annual shows. And you know, that doesn't happen a lot anymore, but Beaumont, when they first got going, had quite a few annual shows every year. Not just regional artists. You will see all of our friends from Dallas, Austin, Houston coming in for those jurors. Kelly Fearing was a juror of one of them, so they were coming from all over. Sweeney judged one of them, so we had a lot of people coming in. Ruth Bornstein, and one question I've had, and a difference I see between Beaumont and Houston, since I've kind of worked in both areas, is Beaumont really doesn't have an art gallery in a true sense of an art gallery, what we know in Dallas and Houston right now. And I think the reason is because of the proximity of Houston. I mean, I will attest, you can make that drive pretty quickly if you put your mind to it. So you can really jump over to Houston and be back within half a day if you need to. But Ruth Bornstein, back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, had an art gallery in Beaumont. A lot of the artists remember showing with her, and her husband helped her run it. They also opened an art gallery in Austin. And she was great friends and taught classes at the Art Museum along with Gillian Hayes and all that group. So once again, we see this emphasis on women. I promise some men are coming up, but we do see this emphasis on women in the area that are really kind of running the show. And fun fact, she was actually showed in a lot of galleries in Texas and New York, and in 1966 was named one of 6 leading watercolor artists in the US. And then this is another piece by Ruth, Falcon's Cove, that was featured in the 15th annual exhibition at the Beaumont Art Museum and won the purchase prize there. So, and this was judged by Kelly Fearing. So he was the judge from UT Austin. Dennis McCarthy, so we've got a man coming up. Now, Dennis, these are examples of his watercolors. I've got a couple slides here. He was born in San Francisco, went to Denver and Chicago to study. Before he came to Texas, he spent some time with Hearst Enterprises in San Francisco. He edited their newspaper, also was a cartoonist and illustrator. And I will say, when I've seen his cartoon works, I mean, you can tell he has a real mastery of line, but he really is much more impressionistic in style with his watercolors, which is probably the nature of the watercolor medium. He also worked in Fort Worth for the Fort Worth Record before he came to Beaumont. He does come to us around the 30s and 40s and worked at the Beaumont Enterprise and Beaumont Journal. So he was really influential in the area. I think he had a big presence, one reason because people would see his name in the papers. But on those annual museum exhibitions, I'm sorry, I have it in my room, but I should have brought it. They would make these little now we do gallery guides, but they'd make these folding cards listing all the artists, the purchase prizes, who the juror was, everything. Well, a lot of times he would illustrate the front cover of those. So sometimes you'll see McCarthy illustrations on those annual exhibitions. Here's another example of his work, and this is actually a Beaumont. You probably can't see it if you get up close and are just looking at the JPEG. This says Beaumont right here. It's a street scene from downtown Beaumont. Herring Coe, and we'll get to some sculpture for a bit, was born in 1907 in Lumberton area, so still in that southeast Texas region of that Golden Triangle, but really lived most of his life in the Beaumont city. He went to South Park College, which is Lamar. It was just before it was Lamar College, Lamar Tech, and then Lamar University. And he graduated in 1926, so pretty early. Not a whole lot is known on Herring Coe, but I will say this, in speaking with David Cargill remembered the first time he saw a Herring Coe sculpture, so that was a really influential moment for him. That's when he realized he wanted to be a sculptor. It just really made an impact. He also was very well known for his civic commissions. So you can see these in Houston at Fondren Library. When you come to Beaumont, you can see them around town. This is of the First National Bank in Beaumont, built in 1937. And here's a detail, but this is the relief, the bas reliefs around the facade here. Herring Co. was responsible for that design. So WPA style. He had a solo show in 1968 at the Art Museum. He also went to the Cranbrook for a while, so very well known in the area at this time, just not a lot. I was speaking with Alan earlier, and he knows someone with the last name of Co, so I might follow up on that, see if there's any relatives in the area. And going to Patty and David Cargill. And I kind of feel bad talking about them. I purposely separated them even though they're married. Some of you may know that, some not, but David and Patty were married. Patty is deceased now. She passed away in 2012. David is still very active in the Beaumont art scene. But they were artists in their own right. A lot of times they get lumped together, but they really should have separate moments where they kind of get to talk about each other individually. David was born in Huntsville, but his parents eventually moved to Beaumont, so he grew up there. And then he goes to the Pratt Institute, and that's where he meets Patty. And before that, David was at Rice. He was going to study pre-med. He wasn't even going to do art. And then he decided, okay, I want to go do that, and that's when he goes to the Pratt. He focuses on industrial design. Patty was focusing on painting, and they come back to Beaumont because they really liked small towns. I asked David, I was like, what brought you back here? You know, do you think if you had stayed elsewhere, things might have been different? And he's like, I love the small town. I love Beaumont. I love Southeast Texas. He wanted to get a job with Lamar, work at the art museum. So he comes back and he goes to Lamar. It's around 1951, and he says, it was actually a man by the name of Pelfrey at the time that was head of the department because Boughton wasn't there yet. He said, you know, I want to teach here. I just graduated from Pratt, and Pelfrey's like, well, you have to have an MFA. So David actually leaves again, goes to Cranbrook to go get his MFA, comes back when he's finished, and then he decides he doesn't want to teach. So he decides he really wants to pursue his art and get commissions. He has he showed briefly with Valley House Gallery back in the day, and then he really has kind of gone at it on his own and kind of survived just his own commissions. We have three works here from the 40s and 50s. You can see he's versatile in an array of different media. We have everything from bronze to terracotta to wood. The piece on the far right is in the permanent collection at the museum. He does everything from more representational figures to abstract, so extremely talented. He also, at the Beaumont Art Museum in the early 50s, would go help hang shows. So one of the directors that came on left, they needed someone to come in. Well, David would go in and help hang. They turned shows around every 2 weeks, which is insane. I mean, I can't even sometimes write an email in 2 weeks. You know, some of those things take so long. I cannot imagine having to flip the shows that quickly. We did them pretty quick at Bill's Gallery sometimes, so that, you know, that gave a pretty good, you had to get new works on the walls, but not 2 weeks. That was just crazy. But he remembers bringing in artists like Paul Klee, Charles Pebworth, so there was an international but also local, regional Texas focus at that time. Patty was really well known with her relationship with her students and also as a painter. Rather abstract pieces. This is a charming piece on the far right that when you see it in person is really nice and thick with impasto. I mean, it has a lot of energy. And she taught with the art museum, but also just from her own home, would have students come there. It was really active. Then they also sometimes work together. So I love this photo of them from the newspapers together when they were younger. And then in 1951, Will Amelia Stearns Price came to David and Patty and said, hey, I was contacted by the manager of the Hotel Beaumont that there is this painting in a dining room that is just all black and white and needs to be touched up. And they want me to do it, but I don't have time. Do you want to go do it? So they're like, sure, we'll go do it. Well, the manager was so pleased with what they did, he said, will you please do a commission, you know, mural in another room? And they decided to focus on the cityscape of Beaumont. So David went around and took photos of the Beaumont cityscape and then projected them on the wall for Patty to sketch out. And they actually painted this mural in the hotel. It is no longer with us, unfortunately, but these are some of the original color sketches that Patty made. And David has them all. I mean, actually, I cropped them down, but these were shot just looking at him on his floor in his room, you know, just all spread out where you can see him, and he can piece them together based on how the landscape flows throughout the city. And apparently, with the big art collection here at the Hilton Anatole, there's an art park. Has anyone walked through? It's not open? Okay. Well, David Cargill has sculpture there. This is from the 80s, but this is here. And I came across, there's a website all about the art here at the Hilton. So if you have seen interesting pieces, just Google art at the Hilton Anatole and it'll come up. But this piece was featured on that. So Apparently you can't go see it though, so. Robert Madden was a really big artist associated with Lamar. He came in and was hired in 1959 to come teach. He taught for over 30 years. That's another thing you see. We have a lot of professors that come in and they stay. They stay for a very long time. So we had students that really developed relationships and could come back and see these professors. And I think that was really something that helped the art program there. He is really known for his modern works. He was always consistently exploring modernism. You can see even with this more representational piece, that kind of firmness of line and sectioning out of the composition that later plays into the development of these more abstract pieces. And he was selected when Sweeney came in at the MFA in Houston. Madden was actually selected by Sweeney for one of his shows. Alexander Calder was the juror that picked him, so. And Robert Regan, who is still with us today and a great source of information for the Southeast Texas scene. He came from Topeka, Kansas, and came in from Iowa after that. And then when he was in Iowa, that was when they were transitioning their program to emphasize modernism. So he comes to Beaumont and does the same thing and brings it with him. Very fond memories of teaching at Lamar. He was hired in '61. Art education at first, and then eventually became the head of the art department. And he did that for many years and retired in 1990. So he's a dear man, has tons of archives and information on the period, and just a really great resource for information, and always willing to talk to people. So you should definitely get in touch with him if you're interested in researching any of this group. Another fun fact is that he's the one that brought nude figure drawing to Lamar. He went to the president and said, if we are going to have a legit art department, we have to offer nude figure drawing. And the president said, okay, well, just don't make a big deal about it. Shield the windows and don't advertise it. So, and then it was okay. Here's the port scene we looked at earlier. Even though he was from the Midwest, he was mesmerized by the boats, the rice fields. We also have crawfish fields. Any of y'all that eat crawfish, you can drive by them on I-10 and see their little huts there. But he was just mesmerized by that and depicted it quite a bit in his work. And in his later years, he used a medium called Duco, which is the lacquer used on automobiles. And he worked with that quite a bit. If you have not seen it in person, it gets this, it's almost like nail polish. It gets this really crazy sheen. And he also kind of scrapes into it. It just has a lot of life. He found out later it was toxic, so he quit using it. But, so watch out if you have a piece, just don't eat it or anything. So Myrtle Karr. Myrtle Karr is someone I am very much fascinated with, and I'm going to go meet with Robert Regan over the next month. I'm giving a presentation in June in Houston, and I'm going to focus more on solely women, and that'll be a lot of fun. And Myrtle is one of those that I really want to find more about, and if anyone knows more about her, please do share. She was at Lamar in the early 50s, a professor there. She just taught art classes, and then in '62, she developed this thing called blotter press, and I brought one of the books with me. I also have a whole bag of them. They're in the bag. You cannot have them. They are not for sale. Tam will hunt you down. But they are amazing works, and they're all kind of individual works in their own right. And you can really see the color difference right here between the slides, by the way. This is one of them. The students at Lamar would develop these books, okay, and they were hand-printed on this cool little press they had. They're all original serigraphs. So no one is exactly alike, and all of them focus on different things. So in that bag, I have some that focus on poetry and different writings. This one is on the world of cacti. So it's an illustrated book of all different cactus varieties. This one actually, though, is from 1967. So a little bit of history, then I'll flip through some more pages as I go. Myrtle was at Lamar, did the press between '62 and '66. Then she was offered a job at the State Department of Art with Louisiana to come and be art supervisor, so she left. She took the press with her, and a lot of students and people followed her. She was that influential. And she kept doing blotter press in Louisiana. So sometimes you'll find them that'll say Lamar University, or Lamar Tech College at that point, Beaumont, and then sometimes they'll reference printed in Louisiana and Baton Rouge. So you can see, these are just little gems. They're awesome, and anyone is welcome to come up and look at them later. I'm also keeping my eye out, so if any of y'all see them for sale, I'm regretting telling y'all that now, so people are gonna be snagging them. But I just think these are really cool books. And Dr. Regan was really good friends with Myrtle, and I've read some letters that they've written once she had moved to Louisiana, and really telling of her style, and I just want to find out more about her. She impacted so many students. She also took them on study abroad. So in the 60s, they were already taking trips to Mexico and all around to view art. So it was really, really important that she was there at Lamar. Richard Stout, who really goes without introduction for many of you in the room today. I thought I would show, I know we're aware of what's at Heritage right now and everything, but I thought I'd show some earlier works by Richard that maybe you haven't seen, maybe you have. Richard was from Beaumont, but we know he went to the Art Institute and then eventually got his MFA at UT Austin. He's really known now kind of as a Houston artist, but we claim him because he was born there and he was very active in his early years in Houston. On the left, we have a mural that Richard painted at the age of 17 for Beaumont High School when he was there. And he sent me 2 or 3 images. I thought it was fascinating. It's long gone. It's not there, but I just thought that was really cool. On the right, you have an early picture of young Mr. Stout. And then on the bottom right, some family friends that lived in Port Neches asked Richard, you know, we have this painting that we just love. Will you come and paint a mural on our wall? And Richard will tell a funny story, enlightened us earlier, but he did this mural all through their living room. Then he goes over to see it one day and they had hung the picture back on top of the mural. So it was kind of double, whatever, you know, I guess it's their home. So I thought that was a fun story. And Richard, too, was a very valuable educator, taught at the museum school at the MFA, but then also at U of H for a number of years. So very devoted. He is still creating outstanding works. Just a reminder, some of his earlier pieces, we have the twin derricks again on the right, on the left. The piece on the right is in the permanent collection at the Art Museum, where I'm at, and was actually a Junior League Purchase Award around 1956. And then I included this other work on the left because this is also in our permanent collection. I often get to pick what art hangs in my office. Right now I have a Dorothy Hood in there and a Gail Stack and Luis Jimenez. I had a Richard Stout in there beforehand, so it's a lot of fun getting to play with that. But then we have a picture of Richard right here with some of his newer work. And I'm very excited to be working with Richard on a show at our museum next fall, so fall of 2017. So that'll be a lot of fun. Erin OBrien was born in a prominent Beaumont family, studied at the Art Students League and Chicago Academy of Fine Arts. She actually studied math quite a bit after graduating with her art degree and came back, ship drafting, job in the engineering department. She designed her own home in Beaumont and really kind of sketched all of that out and is known for that. She was active as well with the Beaumont Women's Club in the early 1930s. Frederick Thomas was from Poland, but came to the States and really was in and out of the Southeast Texas region between the 40s and 70s. He did things for Life magazine and also edited the Encyclopedia Britannica at the time, but was known in the area for teaching. And one of his students was Clarice Holloway, and she would help him actually teach some of his art classes. She would come on and kind of act as a studio hand, and she was a graduate of Lamar University, so out of that group, but she turned her home in Port Arthur into a studio, taught private classes, known for her oil painting. She exhibited in the Texas Generals in the late 1940s, and in pretty much all of the Beaumont annual exhibitions. Myrtle Cox, these pieces are a lot of fun. The piece on the left is just so wonderfully naive and fresh, and I just love looking at that piece. Myrtle was out of Port Arthur. She went to Thomas Jefferson High School, which I can say I went to Thomas Jefferson for 2 years when I lived in Port Arthur. It's no longer there. We now have a different high school in the area, and my grandparents went there. It was there for a long time. And she was friends with a lot of artists in the area and created these whimsical kind of pieces, always skillfully done, but painted from the imagination. So everything was kind of just a stream of consciousness with her work. Later on, she had a stroke, which kind of disabled her from creating and painting as much, but she made cutouts and mosaics in her later years. Mody Karen. I love when artists from the area talk about Mody Karen because their eyes light up. I wish I could have known her. She just sounds like this amazing bohemian kind of spirit that just mesmerized everyone in the area, participated in quite a few theatrical endeavors, and she was affiliated with the Margot Jones theatrical group as well. But she was born in Louisiana and came to Beaumont and eventually lived in Port Arthur. At an early age, she was applying for various art scholarships and one to the Creative Arts School in Houston, and she was awarded that scholarship by Jean Charlton. And she got to go study with Ola McNeill Davidson, and that was really influential. And while she was there, she would have known Prusser, who was there at the same time. And I really think you can see this kind of relationship with their works there. Ola McNeill Davidson really emphasized this moving to modern and abstract. And you can tell with Mody's work, she really took that to heart. So she was well known in that group, but then came back and produced art, abstract art in the 30s, very, very early at the time. And here's some other examples of her work, really filling the composition there with this just non-objective, straight treatise on painting. And then on the right is self-portrait. So that kind of gives you some of that idea of this whimsical character. I love that. I hate to see how she'd paint me, but I think that's a lot of fun. George Hampton was an artist in the area known for his portrait painting, but I'll show you some other examples of his work in a second. He had retrospective shows at the Beaumont Art Museum in 1951 and 58, and painted, had watercolors and acrylics. What I love about these three paintings is seeing his variation in style, and he did all of them well. We have a more impressionistic style, moving a little bit more stylized with the latter two that are a little bit later in his period. And then he also moves to works like this. So really going straight to surrealistic abstraction to really almost non-objective right there. So fun story, he owned a furniture store, and a lot of the artists, including David Cargill, can remember needing furniture. David needed a new bed, so he went and traded art for furniture. So I wish we could still broker like that, but. Herman Hugg passed away recently in 2013. He was born in Strawberry, Arkansas, but grew up in the Panhandle and eventually came to Beaumont after he spent some time in the Navy. And he also was involved with World War II. And the piece on the far right called Foxhole was kind of his take and memory on that war period, rather German expressionist in style. His works often have a kind of surrealistic approach and have a lot of meaning and soul behind them. And I found this quote from an interview with Hugg before his death, where talking about the Foxhole piece, and this is him right here actually leaning over this painting. And the reporter was asking about this painting in particular, and he said, well, this has soul. Rauschenberg's work had soul, I suppose. Again, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about or what soul means. So, you know, I like him. He also made sculpture. These are stunning examples of those works, and you really can kind of get this kind of surrealistic, whimsical idea there and kind of understand this really kind of spiritual connection with his pieces. And at the bottom right, he was a huge champion of the arts. Southeast Texas is really big into their football scene, and he actually made this sign, and I can't quite, what is value of sports to civilization? What is the value of art to civilization? The Beaumont Enterprise gives 100 times more to sports. History books, encyclopedia give it to art. Check it out. So yeah, he was always telling people they need to quit watching football. Yeah, football's fine too, but you know. Frank Garrett, known in the Port Arthur area, received his BA in graphic design from Lamar and really credits Myrtle Karr, the blotter press lady, for where he came from and said she was really influential, studied with her. He traveled to Mexico after his studies and spent some time there, and you can kind of see that influence in some of his works, I think with his palette as well. He came to Beaumont. He was in the Beaumont Independent School District for 20 years and taught there for quite a while. Tons of different media, really all over the place with what he chose to work with. Lin Sweat. One thing that fascinates me about Lin Sweat is how versatile he is. He still paints and is in Connecticut, but from Beaumont, and went to UT Austin. He studied under I messed up on my notes there, flipped a page. He was in Louisiana, and grew up in Nederland, which is about 20 minutes from Beaumont, so all very close, and got his degree in commercial art from Lamar in '56. And he was at the Beaumont Enterprise for a while too, but really received national recognition for his Amelia Bedelia series. Some of y'all probably read that. I read them as a child. We had all the books, and that's really kind of where he became known. He didn't write the books, he just illustrated them. But here we have two works from the 60s, and then look at these that are very surrealist, more hard edge, especially the piece on the far right, that really, really show his versatility and what he was doing. And then a piece in the art collection at the museum that I love. It's hanging in our offices right now, is this hodgepodge of color. This piece has so much texture and so much life when you get up close to it. And there's so many layers. You don't quite get a sense of all the colors here. There's a lot happening there. And Lin was very influential in the area and, like I said, is still creating work right now. And then Jerry Newman, and we're almost finished here. And I ended with Jerry Newman on purpose, because anytime you meet an artist right now that went to Lamar, probably in the 80s, late 70s, 90s, one of the first things they say is, I owe it to Jerry Newman. Jerry Newman is really known for his commitment and championship of the arts. He was an excellent painter too. I mean, Michael Kenom, who's an artist in Houston right now, we had a show of his work in the fall, and when he came, he said, you know, Jerry Newman taught me how to throw paint. He knew how to lay on that paint. I think you can really get a sense of that with this work right here. Just a beautiful piece. He was born in Beaumont, went to UT Austin, later studied in Southern California for a bit, and then came to Lamar and was there for 40 years. So once again, we have another guy that came to Lamar and taught and stayed and really got his roots there and impacted the local landscape for quite a while. His former students include John Alexander, Paul Manus, Michael Kenom. I mean, there are a lot of people that came out of that program. And you can see here, I mean, once again, just, you can see a similar application of paint, but really kind of all over the place with his styles. And then the work I had on my opening slide that I just loved, it's a Gulf Coast scene. It's actually a small painting. You don't get a sense of size when you look up here, but it's a smaller work. He received numerous awards. He made these very representational watercolors as well, so don't be shocked, it's not a fake if you see like a watercolor of a duck by Jerry Newman. I mean, he did those too, and he was awarded awards for those, so very well known. And John Alexander, I can't include John because his first solo show was in 1971 at the Beaumont Art Museum, and he still references that, and our cutoff is now 76, I think is what it is, so it's going to keep rolling. But this piece I thought was perfect for the presentation because this is actually a Southeast Texas image. Has anyone driven the bridge between Port Arthur and Bridge City? It is terrifying. It is a huge bridge. I remember that was like a rite of passage when my parents finally let me drive over that. And it's Rainbow Bridge. You can literally touch the rainbows when you go over that thing. And sometimes if you're lucky, you'll see alligators down on the edge. But here, John Alexander is depicting that bridge in Port area. John went to SMU after his time at Lamar and then eventually ended up in New York. And that's where he is today. He still comes back to the Art Museum quite a while. I know he comes to SMU quite a bit and does things there. So very well known, has made a name for himself around the world and was a product of the Newman time at Lamar. And just the legacy of Newman, here's an image of Jerry. This is some PR from John's show at the Art Museum in 1971. And then it just happened. I love when things like this happen. I emailed Michael Kenom randomly the other day. I think I was on a lot of cold meds. I was kind of sick. And I said, do you have any pictures when you were painting in Newman's classes? He's like, it just so happens a former friend of mine sent me some. So Michael sent me these. He said there's actually a big splatter of green paint. One night Michael got really mad and just threw his brush in the air, and it's still there when he goes to the art department. So some things never change. But you can see that emphasis that Newman left there. And then my final slide, and I'll end with you with looking at how AMSET really involves the past and the present. And that's something I think is very important, and I want to emphasize when I'm there. I do have a commitment to the contemporary artists coming up. We are trying to actively acquire, but we are also looking at our roots and where we came from. Linus Blanton right here is a ceramicist from the area. I actually was in his 8th grade ceramics class when I was in middle school. My parents won't give me my pieces. They want to keep them. But here's Linus in the 70s. He had an exhibition at the Beaumont Art Museum. Well, just this past winter, I gave him a show at AMSET. So this is an exhibition I curated with Linus. And then Richard Stout will be joining us in September of 2017. We're very excited about that. And Richard was one of the first earliest solo shows at the Beaumont Art Museum at a very young age. And then David Cargill, who I talked about a bit. And David is so involved. He comes up to the museum all the time. He made me the most delightful lunch the other day. I just love him. He's a great source of information. And he was influential at the founding of the Art Museum, and now he's on our acquisitions committee. So he's on the committee that helps vote on what pieces come into the museum. And I've really enjoyed getting to know him and work with him on that. And one thing that I take away from this presentation, I'll leave you with a quote. I always like doing that. You know, when I think it's the art historian, kind of OCD organized personality of me that wants to come up with terms that classify a period in an area. I think, you know, oh, they know them for impressionism or abstraction. And one problem I've had with Southeast Texas is that we're kind of all over the place. I mean, you saw Jerry Newman and Lin Sweat doing all these different styles, and that's okay. And I was looking through the old annual exhibition pamphlets, and Kathleen Blackshear, who many of y'all will know out of Navasota, was one of the judges in our 14th annual show in 1965. And this was what she wrote about the art from Southeast Texas that she saw. It isn't seldom that an exhibition can contain a cross-section of the arts of its day. There are primitives, regionalists, cubists, surrealists, pop and op artists, and artists of several other isms, all those isms. As long as these are really works of art, the category doesn't matter. Many of these are works of art. And that's what I want to approach as I go forward, looking at the value of history, the importance of the artist and the foundation of the time, and then where we're going in the future with these works. Thank you very much. Okay. Now I can see y'all. All I saw were those two bright lights. I felt like a bug just staring at the lights the whole time. Any questions? No questions. The after lunch crowd is harsh. Well, thank y'all for coming. We're glad that y'all were able to join us. So, all right. And if anyone wants to see the Blotter Press books, we have them all. So we'll get them out for you if you'd like to see them. Yes?
Did she buy those books as well as print?
They made everything. So it was a total enterprise coming out of Lamar and then out of Louisiana. And they're just wonderful. So, yeah. And then Tam has one that was actually a poet laureate out of Port Arthur, I believe, that they reproduced her poems in it. So it wasn't just students. They would invite other writers, people to come in and help with the books.
Sarah, what happened to Herman Hoag's work?
Not 100% sure. And I was speaking with Lin about that the other day. I never saw his home, but we saw that where he was leaning over the painting. I'm not 100% sure where that work went and what's going on there now. Lin was over there not long before. Lin is our executive director. She was over there not long before he passed, but he had a lot of his work, kept a lot of it was in his own collection, and just was kind of, and he was a bodybuilder too, which is a fun fact, apparently, yeah. And he was apparently quite fit, even in his older age, so.
You didn't mention one person I'm surprised at.
I know, Robert Rauschenberg. So I was wondering if there are a lot of people I didn't mention, and that was hard. I probably went over time as it is. There are a lot of artists from that period. And Robert was in Port Arthur, certainly from Port Arthur, if you do not know that. We also had Janis Joplin, so we can claim her. But, and moved on to other places too. And we didn't really hear from him much after that. But he has a lot of work that references the area. I mean, you can see that quite a bit in his pieces.
Because you're talking about the Southeast Triangle, I wanted to ask if Orange figured into the art scene because I've heard very good things about the H.J. Butler Stark.
I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to mention it, and I just skipped over that. We have a lot of museums in the area. One of them is the Stark Museum in Orange. It's been there for quite a while, focuses on Western art, but they also have a wonderful James Audubon collection and very well-known Newcomb pottery. So if you're in the area, you need to go through there. They're also building an expansion right now that's going to have a state-of-the-art education facility, so it's a great institution. And that came out of the foundation. I think the foundation was really going in the 60s, and then the museum was a little bit later, their collection, but it was a family collection that got that going. And there was also, and I have the pamphlet, David Cargill gave it to me, but there was an art association in Orange. Just I haven't been able to find too much on it, but similar kind of the Port Arthur Arts Association that would exhibit. But Beaumont kind of ended up being the Mecca, just being a little bit of a larger city, and a lot of the artists would come there. Any other questions? It's good? Okay, thank you.